Adrian, let's go now from an issue of a search for justice to protecting democracy.
Right, and what happens when there are attempts to exploit Canada's democracy by meddling with the election. Now, there's no doubt cyber threats are all around us and about to get worse. So there's a plan to handle them from all fronts to protect Canada's upcoming election from foreign interference. And make no mistake, that interference is real. It's already started. And to shut down the online hate that's already been poisoning platforms like Facebook. So let's start right there. Today, Facebook wiped and banned a Canadian far-right commentator and several groups from its platform. As Salima Shivji explains, that act is part of a growing pushback against hate.
There's been a rising in the alt-right.
She's been called out for fueling hate. Now Faith Goldie's words have gotten the far-right commentator and failed Toronto mayoral candidate kicked off Facebook and Instagram. Also banned today, a so-called white nationalist and his organization, and several other far-right groups. Facebook says all 6 violate the company's policy on dangerous groups. In a statement, Facebook says there's no place on its platform for individuals and organizations who spread hate, attack, or call for the exclusion of others on the basis of who they are. Goldie had to resort to Twitter to respond.
Because they have proven themselves to be so terrified and so weak.
Attending the same rally as white supremacist Faith Goldie.
News of the ban made it to the House of Commons. The Conservative leader attacked for attending the same rally as Goldie earlier this year.
We will always denounce those who promote hateful ideologies while standing up for energy workers.
Facebook's move comes on the heels of weeks of criticism after the Christchurch shooting was live streamed for all to see.
They wanted people to react.
But at this forum on how to stop online hate, Facebook's decision is met with some skepticism.
They're kind of just the tip of the iceberg. There are several other groups out there, some worse than the ones that were removed today, that still should be removed. But we're cautiously optimistic with this as a first step.
It's a fine line, curbing hate while respecting free speech. Still, the Liberal government is applauding Facebook and hoping others follow suit.
In Canada, when it comes to hate speech, when it comes to inciting violence, those are things that we don't accept out on the street corner. We shouldn't accept them on platforms either.
The minister is also hinting she's open to further regulation so that companies aren't left to police themselves. Something similar perhaps to what the UK is looking at, where social media sites would be forced to pay fines if they don't block hateful propaganda. Salima Shivji, CBC News, Ottawa.
So let's talk about more trouble online. Think specifically of the interference in the U.S. presidential election of 2016. That was unprecedented. Back then, Russian disinformation reached 126 million Facebook users alone. Now, the good news from the CSE, that's Canada's electronic spy agency, we probably aren't facing a threat that big, but the bad news is the threat is real, and it's not just the Russians.
Once actors see certain successes out there, that there will be copycat behaviors.
Now, spies rarely talk in certainties. Predictions are shaded by factors like confidence in sources. But a new CSC report puts the chance of meddling in this year's federal election at about 80%. Olivia Stefanovic explains what that means.
The Communications Security Establishment says that foreign cyber threats targeted half of all advanced democracies holding national elections last year. That's 300% more than just a few years ago. And the target the CSE is most worried about is you.
Canadians are going to have to do their part, and we're all the citizens having to do our part, which is consume information with a critical eye.
The CSE predicts foreign actors will attempt to sway voters before they head to the polls, sowing divisions, trying to shape opinions and behaviors.
There were numerous reports that, Canadians were fighting and being killed by Russians or separatists, basically, in the region who are pro-Russia.
Foreign entities can use fake stories to try to discredit campaigns, platforms, and policies. In 2016 and 2018, false reports about Canadian operations in Ukraine alleged that Canadian soldiers had been killed, and they were seen thousands of times on Facebook, and it can still be found online today. This expert says Iran, Venezuela, and Saudi Arabia also have capabilities. So, can this be stopped? The federal government has set up a task force to warn Canadians of potential interference.
I think the main strategy right now is to prime the population and the media and make them aware that this is something that is likely to happen.
The government is trying to get social media companies to abide by a set of rules, but it's not forcing them to do so. On a positive note, the CSC says Canada's voting system is fairly secure thanks in part to paper ballots. Protecting the perception of voters will be harder. Olivia Stefanovic, CBC News, Ottawa.
CBC has a unit that's watching for election interference. Journalists Roberto Roca and Jeff Yates are part of it, recently pouring through data on thousands of fake accounts that have been dumped by Twitter and the 9 million trolling tweets they had generated, some part of campaigns to divide Canadians. Here's some of what they learned.
We found some indication that there might have been a small-scale influence campaign in 2017 on Canadian social media. So we saw that fake Twitter accounts run out of Iran tried to stoke negative messages about Canadian pipeline projects.
Do you see that as kind of a dry run?
It could be. It could. One analyst I spoke to said that the trolls might just be dipping their feet in the water, testing out, see what works, see what Canadians respond to.
Roca and Yates determined the fake Twitter accounts were repeatedly retweeting real Canadians. In other words, artificially stoking the flames of dissent in this country. And there was a pattern to the fake accounts.
Iran, Russia, and Venezuela seem quite active in talking about Canadian issues. So we came up with at least about 70 keywords that we think are just uniquely Canadian that wouldn't exist anywhere else. And when we filtered the data with those keywords, we came to close to 22,000 tweets.
And the bottom line of what it told you was what?
Was that the two main topics, the two main divisive topics that they think that they could use to divide Canadians are immigration and pipelines.
So that's just a really quick sense of their research, but there's a lot more out there. In the days to come, we'll be taking a closer look at some of the current efforts to chip away at the integrity of Canada's next election and what you can do to guard against that manipulation.